If you like what you're hearing, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/mtgbooks, or search me up, Phil Dawson. Thank you. Chapter 19. Survival. The Caverner's map room was the scene of a somber reunion. Civi broke the melancholy news to Eldamri that they had failed to destroy Predator. Half their force, including Tainal, was lost. This was countered by Eldamri's survival and the addition of Takara to the group. They shared their simple rations with Takara. She recovered her strength rapidly after eating and drinking, and willingly lent her knowledge of the stronghold and its workings to the rebels' cause. Med, who knew something of the healing arts, tended Eldamri's injuries. The rebel leader's left arm was broken at the wrist, so Med made splints from seats in the map room, bound Eldamri's arm with them, and fitted him with a sling. His knee, though badly bruised, did not seem broken. Civi described Tainal's death to Eldamri. "The man in the torture chamber looked exactly like you, Eldamri," she said. "It's only when he began to change that we suspected the truth." "You say he turned into Grevin?" asked Takara thoughtfully. "Yes, I saw Grevin Ilvek when we first arrived, and it was definitely him." Eldamri studied Takara closely. "What does it mean? Is Grevin a shapeshifter?" "Not unless he's acquired the gift since I've been in prison." "Then who killed Tainal?" Takara traced a line on her face with a single finger, down her nose, across her lip, to her chin. "There is a possibility—" "Never mind that," Garnon said. "We must get out of here." "Agreed," said Eldamri. "Takara, what's the best way?" "Takara." She looked up from her frowning daydream. "What? Out? Why, we have to go through the Citadel." The young rebels groaned. "Can't we keep going in this direction?" said Seamus, pointing away from the fortress. "That direction's the Mog Warrens," Takara said. "Maze of tunnels, shafts, and Mog nests, infested with thousands of ugly, bad-tempered creatures. We wouldn't get 100 yards inside before we were attacked, lost, or eaten." The map room fell quiet. At length, Eldamri said, "We got in by stealth, in disguise. It's only natural we leave the same way." "Our disguises are wearing a bit thin," Civi said. "We'll change them. They're looking for an elf and 5 soldiers. We'll become something else." "My face is known," said Takara. "Could become a man," Civi suggested. Takara smiled thinly. "I don't think I could carry it off as well as you, my dear." Civi reddened and was about to utter a sharp reply, but Eldamri cut her off. "Our strength lies in staying together and going as quietly as we can. Never run from a fight in my life, but there are some odds a wise warrior doesn't test. 7 of us against the entire stronghold, not a battle. It's a prolonged execution." They did what they could to change their appearance. Those in Rath uniforms discarded their mantles and tore them into rags to polish their helmets and breastplates. Carreno, slimmest of the rebels, took off his breastplate and gave it to Eldamri, turning his backplate around to wear it on his chest. Med wrapped Eldamri's head in makeshift bandages to obscure his elven features. Takara watched this with considerable amusement. "You should have been actors," she said. "Look like a touring company of bards." Civi reached across Garnon's waist and drew his knife. She advanced on Takara, holding the blade in a threatening manner. Call her off, Eladamri. I'm your valued guide, remember? Then Civi. Civi swung the knife in a wide arc. Takara tried to block by grabbing Civi's knife hand. The Vec woman was far stronger, and Takara had to use both hands to hold off the knife. Civi's free hand darted in. She snatched hold of Takara's long red ponytail and spun her around by tugging on it sharply. With her comrades shouting, "No, no, Civi!" she slashed Takara's hair right off where it was tied. Civi tossed the heavy hunk of hair to the floor and returned Garmin's knife. Takara knelt by her shorn locks. Why did you do that? You need to change your appearance too, O Takara, Civi said. Without that hair and the little dirt on your face, you can be a charwoman. Enough, said Eldamri sharply. Won't have this bickering. Med was nearest Takara. She went to him and wordlessly demanded his knife. Civi stood back and let the Totem Vec drop from her hand. Med wouldn't give the woman his knife, so she took it herself. Civi flipped the lethal end of her weapon back and prepared to cast it. Staring at the Vec woman with hollow eyes, Takara used Med's knife to saw off even more of her hair. When he saw she didn't mean to attack Civi, Med gently took the knife away from Takara and offered to even up the horrid haircut. Your problem, Takara said to Civi, is that you don't go far enough. Laughing, Civi recoiled the Totem Vec. I'll try to remember that. From being 5 soldiers, an elf, and an emaciated woman, they were now 6 reasonably tidy soldiers and a crop-haired, emaciated woman. They cleaned up the map room to hide the fact that they'd been there and left the tower by the upper bridge to avoid the Gellerach still loose in the prison. There were no new sentries on the bridge, so they hurried across. Don't like it, Civi declared. Takara pushed past her to take the lead. They don't expect intruders between the Citadel and the Mogwarns, she said. No one's that crazy. No one but us, Carreno said. Med and Seamus shrugged at each other and followed her. Carreno and Garnon went next, leaving Eldamri to shoo Civi along. I don't know if I like that woman or hate her, Civi muttered. Make up your own mind, replied Eldamri. But until we're free of this place, don't turn your back on her. Just inches to go. Urtai could hardly see. His eyelids were so swollen, but with his mind's magical eye, he could see the cube now extended over the edge of the furnace cone. In another 20 minutes, it would be over. His last hope, the retriever, apparently failed. Belby had not come. Facing death, he had the odd thought that he would be contributing to the composition of Rath in a very literal way. All bodies returned to the soil, but his would disintegrate in the furnace and be whirled into the flowstone matrix. His component atoms would mingle with the substance of Rath, pass through the factory, and be pumped onto the surface along with billions of pounds of flowstone. There'd be a little patch of Rath that was Urtai. Wondered if his consciousness would survive. If so, he hoped Krovax would walk over him someday. He'd be sure to trip him. Urtai. He recalled a book he'd read in one of the royal libraries about the death pits of Rath. Past Evankars had used the black tarry residue left over from the making of flowstone to fill in the gaps of the stronghold cavern. As it was poisonous and corrosive, some Evankars had taken to tossing unwanted prisoners into this muck. As a result, the book claimed the death pits had achieved kind of a collective sentience, melded from the souls of people who died in it. Urtai! It was a real voice calling his name. He managed to open his right eye to a tiny slit. Belby? The retriever worked after all. She looked splendid in her black diamond armor and Phyrexian headdress. She was tearing at the cube with her hands, but the surface was too hard and smooth. She could make no impression on it. Tube, he said. Break the tube. She jumped down and found the feeder tube on the back. No thicker than her little finger, she easily snapped it. Semi-liquid flowstone spilled across the platform until she crimped the tube shut. Tiny silver spheres danced around her feet. She heard feet pounding on the ladder coming up the furnace cone. A man in bright armor appeared. Nasser. The narrow ledge between her and the ladder was speckled with spinning globals of flowstone, still not solidified. She guessed the radiance of the energy stream was keeping them liquid longer than noble. Excellency, stay where you are. I'm to bring you back to the coronation, Nasser shouted above the crackling beam. I'll come back once Urtai is safe. My orders are to bring you back immediately. Let the boy go. No. He drew his sword. You must. It's the will of Krovax. Belby slid her feet along to avoid slipping on the flowstone globals. She struck a fighting pose. You cannot compel me. Nasser saw the flowstone droplets and plainly understood the danger. He imitated Belby's foot sliding and inched closer. The Rathy sergeant jabbed tentatively with his sword tip. Belby swatted the flat of the blade away with her bare hands. This is senseless, Nasser declared. Come back with me and complete the ceremony. You can save the boy afterward. I do not jump to Krovax's bidding. Go back and tell him I'll return when I choose. Belby slid closer and unleashed a kick that caught Nasser at the waist. He was a strong man, and though the blow drove the wind from his chest, he kept his feet. He sheathed his sword and swung a mailed fist. Belby blocked one punch, but the other hit her solidly on the cheek. She staggered back, slipping on a bright silver pellets of flowstone. Only the weight of the cube behind her kept her from falling backward into the furnace. Had enough? Nasser asked, lowering his hands. From a sitting position, she sprang 3 feet in the air, driven upward by the power of her fingers and toes alone. She spun using the centrifugal force that helped her turn to make her feet into lethal weapons. Her left foot clipped the tip of Nasser's nose. Her right met his jaw, which shattered under the impact. His hands flew up, and he reeled away. Flowstone greased his tread, and he fell face down on the platform on top of more silver globals. With a single deep scream, he slid feet first into the furnace. Belby wasn't much better off. Completely out of control, she too landed face down, but because she was astride the platform, she was able to grip the edges with her hands and feet, avoiding Nasser's fate. Even so, her right hand, forearm, leg, and calf were singed by the energy beam. Pain was nothing. She carefully got up, brushing away the deadly droplets behind her. Urtai! You won, he said, vastly relieved. Can you get me out of here? I'll try. She crouched beside the cube and blew on the scattered silver pellets. One by one, the frictionless spheres skittered into the furnace. When the platform was clean, she put her shoulder against the cube and pushed it back from the edge. It was enormously heavy, but she shifted it back far enough that it wouldn't easily topple over the ledge. Belby rattled down the steps to the control dome. There were all sorts of implements there, and she found a cabinet of heavy tools meant for dealing with accidental spills or accretion problems. Belby grabbed an axe, a wedge, and a sledgehammer with special flowstone cutting heads. She tucked these under her arm and ran back up the steps to Urtai. Belby put down the hammer and wedge and attacked the cube with the axe. Using both hands, she swung the heavy axe in a wide arc from behind her head. It struck the cube with a loud clang, cutting an inch-deep gouge in the surface. Belby swung again without realizing it, let out a hoarse, angry yell. The cube shifted slightly from its blow. She hit it again and again. After 8 terrific hits, the axe fell from her hands. Her shoulders were dislocated. Wincing from the unsuppressed pain, Belby climbed atop of the cube. She crawled to Urtai, now resting his chin on the metal. I can't do it, she gasped. Not with these tools. I'm sorry, Urtai. It's all right. I'm about gone anyway, he whispered. Don't you dare leave me, she said, grasping his cheeks in her hands. You're my friend. My only friend. I won't let you go. When he didn't answer, Belby tried clawing the stone around his neck. He loosened it a bit with his own magic before fatigue had claimed him. There was just enough room for her to hook her fingers inside. Pull. Her shoulders burned. Her nervous system sent out insistent warnings for her to stop. Need help? She jerked around, spied Krovax on the furnace cone. A halo of residual energy was fading around him. He teleported from the coronation ceremony. The intense blue glare of the energy beam made his dark skin look gray. His white garments glowed with reflected radiation. Don't taunt me, Krovax, Belby said. I disposed of your men, and I can dispose of you.
Threats, Excellency? And here I came, to offer my help.
She slid off the cube. Her arms were almost useless, hanging at her sides like dead weights. Release Urtai, she demanded.
I will, on one condition.
No conditions. Release him. Krovax folded his arms.
You know, I can command the cube to squeeze him to jelly from where I stand,
he said.
Or I can have it throw itself into the furnace.
Breathing hard, fighting the pain, Belby glared hatefully at Krovax. She was beaten. As long as she cared what happened to Urtai, he had her. All right. Name your condition.
I'll dissolve the cube and leave the boy here. You return with me to the ceremony directly and do what you promised to do.
It was too simple. Is that all? Asked Belby.
That's all. Of course, whether or not the boy survives his close exposure to the energy beam is a matter out of my hands.
Belby made two fists. The effort made her shiver. I'll bring him with us,
No,
said Krovax.
you must leave him here. That's my condition. Say yes now, the offer will be withdrawn.
She lurched toward him, was gratified to see him step back. Why do you need me so much? She said. You have the power to rule Rath. Why are you so set on me proclaiming you Evankar?
Stupid question. You're the emissary of the overlords. What I am, I owe to them, and I need their stamp of approval. I can rule Rath, as I am now, but there are factions within the stronghold that will not recognize me as Evankar without your declaration. Time is short, Excellency. Our conjunction with Dominaria is just days away. I don't have time to suppress rebels, woo support from the local population, and prepare for the invasion of Dominaria all at the same time. Your announcement that I am the true Evankar will save me much effort. Now come. There's no more time for banter. My crown awaits.
Free Urtai. Krovax nodded. The cube promptly began to melt, like a pat of butter on a hot griddle. Silver rivulets of flowstone spilled off the edge into the furnace. In seconds, Urtai's shoulders were visible. Belby held onto him as the liquefied flowstone sluiced away. She kissed him lightly on the forehead. He cracked his swollen eyes. Urtai's voice was a hoarse whisper. I heard what you said. Go. I'll be all right. I'll come back for you. His head lolled to her shoulder. Urtai whispered in her ear. Let's use your portal and escape. Belby lowered him carefully to the platform. That may not be possible, she said. Must. Strong arms pulled her away. Krovax put an arm around her waist and held her close. With her injured arms, Belby did not fight. I hate you, Krovax. He smiled quite pleasantly.
Good. A strong ruler should be hated and feared. Now that I've achieved the one, I'll see what I can do about the other.
Before Belby could respond, he teleported. Everything was blanked out in a fierce white flash, vision, hearing, all her senses. Even Belby's hatred was extinguished for the duration of the trip. The rebels re-entered the citadel easily enough, but 50 yards inside the palace they ran smack into a cordon manned by a large contingent of Rathi soldiers. Takara dropped back from her lead position to walk beside Eldamri. What are we going to do? She asked. Bluff? What else can we do? He whispered to the others. I'm your captain. Say nothing, but follow my lead. A breastwork of boxes had been erected across the circular junction. At least 100 soldiers milled around behind the barrier. As the rebels approached, the commander of the cordon came out and ordered them to stop. Identify yourselves? Eldamri stepped out from the ranks of his band. We were called to the prison a few hours ago, he said. I'm about to break out. Caught this one walking around loose. He took Takar roughly by the arm and shoved her forward. Some of Lord Volrath's creatures are free in there too. We had to clear out. There are rebels at large, disguised as Royal Army soldiers, said the commander. See anyone suspicious? Not a soul. There was some kind of trouble in the Mogwarns, though. We got as far as the map tower, and we heard commotion from there. The commander laughed harshly. If the damn rebels went to Mogtown, that's the end of them. He braced a scrap of parchment against his knee and made some notes using a charcoal stick. What's your name, soldier? He asked. Dranik, Captain Dranik, said Eldamri. The commander, who was only a lieutenant, stiffened and threw a salute. Sorry, sir. I didn't recognize your rank. It's understandable. If you're through, Lieutenant, we have to take this wandering prisoner to Lord Greven. Let him through, the officer shouted. The barricade was open for the rebels. Takara regarded Eldamri sourly, but she allowed herself to be guided through the cordon. The rebels crossed the junction to the main corridor. Crates used to create the bulwark on the other side were pulled apart for them. Just a moment, called the lieutenant. For my report, Captain Dranik, what company are you with? Gammon flashed the elf 4 fingers. Eldamri shook his head. They'd been claiming to be from the 4th Company all along, and the Rathi troops were onto that ruse. From the 10th Company. Soldiers taking down the barrier for them suddenly stopped. Lieutenant's charcoal stick snapped and fell to the floor. His smudged hand went to his sword hilt. We are the 10th Company. I've never seen you before. They're the rebels! Take them! Civi and the men tore at their weapons. Eldamri pushed the bandage back from his eye and snatched the Rathi sword from his hip. The way was open, but 100 Rathi soldiers surrounded them. Civi parried a sword thrust with her stolen blade. The Totenbeck was hidden behind her breastplate. She needed a few free seconds to get it out. Med dashed in front of her to ward off any fresh attacks. Garnon, Seamus, and Crano formed a triangle in front of Eldamri. With his injured hands, the elf was in no shape to fence with the enemy. The rebels held their own for several seconds. Then Civi got her Totenbeck unleashed. In short order, she struck down 3 Rathi soldiers, clearing a way to escape. Takara, unarmed and not fighting, took Eldamri's arm and drew him to the unguarded opening in the wall of crates. Once he was through, the other rebels slowly retreated. Civi whipped her weapon back and forth, forcing the soldiers to maintain their distance. When they got too bold, the whistling blade of the Totenbeck caught him in the face, throat, leg. Civi was the last rebel to leave the cordon. Med shouted for her to hurry. I'll be there, she replied. One of the crates used to block the way was poised atop another. Civi retreated through the gap and buried the tip of her blade in the top of the crate. With a two-handed pull, she toppled the box from its place, blocking the way. Yes! Civi flicked her wrist to recover the Totenbeck. She tugged in vain. The iron blade was hopelessly pinned underneath the heavy crate. Soldiers were scrambling over the barricade. Civi glanced over her shoulder. Her friends were almost out of sight. She threw down the handle of the Totenbeck and drew the less familiar sword. 4 soldiers dropped to the floor and came at her. She parried the first, dodged the second man's attack, ran through the third man as he lowered his guard prematurely, and received the 4th soldier's sword point directly in her chest. It slid off her cuirass but got snagged in her belt, piercing her side just above her left hip bone. Civi backhanded the man who'd wounded her, turned and tried to run. More men poured over the barricade. Bleeding profusely and limping, Civi managed to make it only a few feet before she was overtaken. She cut savagely at her attackers, but the sword was wrenched from her hand. The iron hilt of another connected solidly with her head, and she went down. Takara and Crano hastened Eldamri along. They changed direction twice to throw off pursuit, doubling back to a corridor running upward through the citadel into the palace area. As they huddled beneath an archway shaped like a monstrous animal's ribcage, it became plain Lyn Civi was not going to catch up with them. We should go back, Med said, moving away from the others. Stop, Eldamri said. You'll be taken as well. But Civi, he's right, said Takara. She's already dead. Silence ensued. Med slammed a fist against the skeletal arch. Stayed behind so we could escape. It was her choice, Garnon said, putting a hand on his comrade's shoulder. We should honor her sacrifice by staying together. It's my fault, said Eldamri. Thought I was being clever by changing what regiment we came from. I didn't know we were in the midst of the 10th Company. If you're all through taking blame, I suggest we move on, Kara scolded. There are a lot of passages to cover. Now that we've been discovered, they'll flood the corridors with troops hunting for us. Eldamri agreed. The direct route, around the factory and out the Grand Causeway, was likely to be thick with alert enemy soldiers. Kara suggested they ascend into the palace, go around the factory at a higher level. There are flowstone pipes and braces branching out from the factory to the crater wall, Kara said. We can follow those. Are there openings to the outside? asked Seamus. Oh, yes, she said. There's all sorts of vents, blowholes, and exhaust channels, perforating the crater. With heavy hearts, the 4 rebels went on, climbing the circular ramp into the palace quarter. Taking up the rear, Eladamri turned to Takara. What do you think our chances are? She avoided his eyes. Few or none. Frankly, it's astonishing we've gotten this far. There must be something else going on here, something vital and diverting. Eladamri explained what he knew about Krovax and his claim to the throne. Takara actually smiled when she heard this. What's amusing, he said. You speak of this Krovax as if his elevation were a foregone conclusion, she replied. Nothing is certain, especially in the stronghold. Above and ahead, a clash of steel meant the rebels had encountered another hostile patrol. Eladamri hurried as hard as his battered legs would take him. One whole turn of the ramp revealed the rebels hotly engaged with 6 palace guards. Takara hung back, flattening herself against the wall. Eladamri drew his sword and entered the fray. Slipping in beside Seamus and Garnon, he awkwardly traded cuts with a heavily armored guardsman. Seamus landed a telling blow to the man's shoulder, who dropped his spear. While stooping to retrieve it, Eladamri rapped him smartly on the face with his sword hilt. The guard rolled down the ramp out cold. He slid to a stop near Takara. She tugged the ornate dagger from the guard's belt and with both hands shoved it through the unconscious man's throat. Eladamri saw her do it. When she stood up, their eyes met. Takara shrugged. Another guard fell, the victim of a stop thrust by Carreno. The remaining 4 began to withdraw, but the rebels kept the pressure on him. One man tried to run. Garnon sprang after him, but in his haste, he forgot the guard's nearest compatriot. The Rathi guard swung his heavy spear sideways, the shaft taking Garnon in the gut. The Dahl warrior doubled over, shocked by his sudden reverse, and the fleeing guard turned and speared him through the back. His triumph was as short-lived as he was, for in the next instant, Med drove his sword through the guard's chin. The other guards were boxed in against the wall, cut down by the hard-fighting rebels. Sweat pouring down his face, Eladamri knelt with Med beside Garnon. Med tried to find a pulse and, failing to find one, shook his head. Eladamri gently pulled his hand away. He was a gallant comrade, said the elf. Now we must hide his body. Why? Said the anguished Med. We can't let the Rathi know we're losing numbers. We couldn't help them taking Civi, but we must disguise our losses. They don't know how few we are. He dragged Garnon to the top of the ramp and pushed him into a small oval opening Takara identified as a warm air duct in the flowstone factory. Carreno and Seamus carefully wiped away all traces of blood between the duct and the place where Garnon had fallen. Where are we? Eladamri asked. Below the courtier's apartments, Takara said. Over there are the dream halls. Reduced to just 4, rebels hurried on. The passages already echoed with the sound of massed soldiers. The sweat on Eladamri's neck began to go cold. This was the sort of end he feared most. Hunted, dying by inches, like a beast at bay. Compared to this, even the torture chamber was preferable. He resigned himself to death the moment Brevin and his Mogs had chained him to the wall. That he survived was a great victory, and for a while he allowed himself to hope they might escape. Now the coils of Rathi power was slowly enveloping them. His brave fighters were dying one by one. The end seemed inevitable. Like an animate hedge of spears, a wall of guards blocked the passage in front of them. Refusing several calls to surrender, the rebels retraced their steps to the top of the spiral ramp. Even as they reached the landing, they could see a stream of armed men surging up the ramp from below. Not good. Not good, Med kept repeating. We need another place to go. Now, said Carreno. Takara pointed. The only place left is the dream halls, but the doors are sealed, and only the Evancar can open them. Eladamri urged his friends to follow. If I'm to die, I'd rather do so in a place called the dream halls than in common crowded corridor like this. Seamus, the fastest of the group, overtook the elf chieftain and reached the enormous double doors first. He slammed his shoulder against the right panel, and to his surprise, the door yielded. 200 soldiers and guards pursued the rebels to the very doors of the dream halls. Some paused to cast spears at the fleeing party, but all missed. Carreno, Med, Takara, and Eladamri slipped through the open door. When their leader was through, the warriors threw themselves against the door. When it was shut, Med slammed the massive footbolt into the floor, locking it. Seamus and Takara slid a huge horizontal bolt into place as well. Carreno and Med laughed at their near escape. Seamus paced back and forth in front of the doors. Takara slumped to the floor. Eladamri alone walked deeper into the dream halls. The vast dimensions, frowning pilasters decorated with the busts of Rath, it all somehow reminded him of a strange forest clearing lined with lofty black trees. He fingered the wooden fetish hanging from his neck. His instincts were right again. This would be a good place to die.